Good afternoon, everybody. So we're just letting the attendees join the webinar. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to webinar 2 associated with run 2 of the masterclass series we've been organising on ensuring accurate classification of HRR variants. So it's my usual pleasure to do some of the basic housekeeping rules before we hand over to our speakers. We have automatically muted your microphones to avoid any background noise. Please do not use your microphones unless we give you the opportunity to actually submit questions or talk to us, but we're not planning to do that. Just to make you aware that the webinar is being recorded. That's primarily because we want to make it available to you as soon as possible after the webinar, so that you can use it for your ongoing education and training. AstraZeneca very kindly facilitated this last time, so we're pretty confident that we can get the webinar available to you on the EMQN and GenQA YouTube channels pretty quickly after the webinar has been recorded. And finally, and this is probably the most important part, if we just go back a slide, please. Is that we are, as normal, having a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, depending on time, obviously, but the idea is really this is supposed to be interactive for you guys. So please do use the Q&A with a few caveats to using it. So it's obviously a complicated subject we're talking about, and it's also complicated for me and my co-chair to actually make sure we triage the questions properly. So to help us make sure that you get the most out of it, please, could you make sure that you start all your questions with the case that you're relating to. So if it's to case 1, put the first few words be case 1 and then put your question. If it's general, just put general. That will allow us to triage the questions a bit easier and make sure that we can get through them in the time we have available, and hopefully we can get a response to you. Having said that, we won't get through all the questions. I'm sure we get a lot of questions, so we will make sure after the webinar has been recorded that we can contain a summary of all the questions, and we'll go into the actual report itself. So don't worry if we don't get around to all of your questions, but we'll do the best we can within the time available. Next slide, please. Your feedback is absolutely crucial to us. It's really important for us, and it certainly helps us make sure we provide high quality training to you guys. So please do complete the feedback survey that you will get by email after the webinar is completed. Should take no more than 2 minutes, but your feedback is important to us, so please do contribute to that. Next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to hand over very shortly on next slide to my co-chair, Prof. Sandy Deans from GenQA. As you know, Sandy and I have been organising these webinars for the 7th run, so this is run 7. But we have an excellent panel of panelists today. So Kathleen Klaas from Ghent in Belgium, Arjen Mesenkamp from Nijmegen in the Netherlands, and finally Andrew Morani from Alberta in Canada. Spread across the globe here, we can see we've got a European and a Canadian perspective in different time zones, but I'm really grateful to the contributions of all of our panelists to this webinar, and I'm pretty sure you'll get a really good webinar out of it, and lots of educational, continuing education for you guys as well. So I'm going to hand over to my co-chair, Sandy Deans.
Thank you, Simon, very much indeed. So next slide. Just a quick slide here with the disclaimer and disclosures of both Simon and myself and our expert panel. So next slide. So as Simon mentioned, this is run 7, and we're delighted that we're seeing a huge still number of participants from many different countries participating in these variant classification assessments. So next slide. This is just a summary of how we deliver the assessment tool. I think what's very different with this assessment is it's run for individuals. So it's not a laboratory based, which a lot of external quality assessment schemes or proficiency testing schemes are delivered. It's about that individual. So it's about giving you that personal confidence that you yourself is able to assess and correctly classify the pathogenicity of sequence variants. So the tool's online, it's delivered by GenQA through the GTAC system, which is based for individual competency assessments. It's the Genomics Training, Assessment and Competency tool. So the idea here is that training can be delivered locally or nationally or through lots of different mechanisms, but this is actually demonstrating your competency. So it's delivered through the web, so anyone, anywhere can participate. The tasks tend to be randomly generated, apart from a static EQA like here we're presenting today. It's an automated assessment, so you get your own scores back. Some of our modules you can complete at your own pace, so you can participate throughout the year. And there's also feedback, training, performance review, or your own individual feedback as you get with these EQA runs. So next slide, please. So to date, as I say, we've had 7. We've concentrated primarily on BRCA1 and BRCA2 variants. This is something that we know is people have struggled with, particularly with generic classification guidelines coming out. We know BRCA1, BRCA2 has its own nuances, and that needs to be understood and brought into clinical practice. In 2020, we extended the scope of the assessments to include the HRR genes, and that has continued throughout this year. And we focused our first set of webinars and run 6 on just BRCA1, BRCA2, and then for run 7, which we're going to discuss today, we're just focusing on the other HRR genes. Now, I think going forward, we know that fewer labs test for the HRR genes, and BRCA1, BRCA2 are more commonly tested. So I think we'll maybe mix up the next EQA runs to encompass all of the genes going forward. So next slide, please. This is a snapshot of some of the high-level data just of participants. So you can see that we have had 436 people register. However, only 289, we still had 289 people participating, but we do see a drop of people registering and those who actually go into the system and complete the assessment. And I think we'd quite like to understand what that, why we're getting that change in participation. So maybe if you're doing your feedback through the webinar, as Simon requested you to do, it would be quite nice to know why this may be the case that you've not participated. We're aware everybody's got major time constraints about delivering your normal clinical service, but it would be nice to know if there was something we could improve to make it easier for you to participate. So you can see here on our lovely map, the countries covered in green, and we have got 53 different countries being represented in this EQA. And across the top here in the graph, you can see we've got quite a wide spread of different countries. The majority of participants coming from the UK, but more than 50% coming from other areas, and right across Europe, South America, and obviously into China and Asia as well, where we have a lot of participants. So it's great to see that we're actually getting that global reach out there. One of the challenges, and I'm sure this is going to come up in our expert panel review today on the webinar, is about how we apply classification guidelines. Nobody's using exactly the same way. People, they're subjective. They really are about your way of applying them to the case that you're reviewing. And it's something that we find quite challenging at times to be able to assess what the true answer should be. So we try very hard to try and work out which guidelines are being applied, and thank you for participating and providing that information. But also it's about using the combination of different guidelines. Now, there's no right or wrong answer of which guidelines should be used or whether one should be used over and above the other. It's really about just raising awareness to you that there are multiple guidelines out there and how they can be applied and how they are updated and can maybe potentially change the classification of variants as we learn how to do this more effectively. So next slide, please. This is a summary of the 6 variants that were included in run 7. And as I said, we were focusing on the HRR genes themselves. We wanted to sort of have a spread of different genes, so we weren't targeting just one particular gene, and we've got 4 different genes covered here in this run. And we also wanted to not just put very easy barn door class 5 pathogenic variants in there or very easy benign variants in either. We really wanted that spread. And in particular, we want to see that spread where the classification crosses the boundary of clinical management. So a 4 or a 5 doesn't necessarily have as big a clinical impact as if a individual variant classification crosses that boundary, so a 3 to a 4, 5, or a 3 down to a 2, for example. So I'm sure we'll discuss all this as we go forward and discuss each variant in turn. So next slide from me, which is the last one in this summary. I think here we've got some really good news, and I think we should take some positive feedback from this, that participation really is improving the standard of classification. Now, we can't say all variants are all the same to classify. As I say, there's some that are very obviously pathogenic and some very obviously benign. But I think we can say here that we are seeing an improvement in the number of correctly classified variants across the runs. So for this run in particular, we've got 4% of participants classifying all 6 variants correctly. And then we see a huge number whereby there's 5 variants classified or 4 variants classified correctly. And this is an improvement as we've seen across the runs, particularly from 5, 6, and then run 7 as we're presenting today. So I would definitely recommend you to continue participating. If you're one of those individuals whereby you are maybe not classifying things in line with the expert panel in this EQA assessment, then I would definitely recommend you continue to participate and come to the webinars and masterclass, because here we've got evidence that it does actually help going forward and it has true educational value. So I'm going to stop now and I'm going to hand over to Arjun, who's going to kick us off with the variant classification deep dives, and we'll move on to our first variant. So next slide, please.
Hi, thank you.
And I'll hand over to you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sandy. Hi, my name is Arjen Mensenkamp and I am a clinical laboratory geneticist in Nijmegen, the Netherlands. And I'm also a member of the ClinGen Enigma expert panel for BSc01 and BSc2. But today I will discuss with you both ATM variants. The first variant, C.7475T2G, and that is encoding leucine at 2492 to arginine. And it is a missense variant within the fat domain in the 3' end of the gene. And ClinVar contains records for this variant with a conflicting outcome from benign to VUS. It is also present in the LOED database as a VUS. And the variant is also present in NOMAD and in 26 alleles in the non-Finnish cohort. And that already explains that PM2 cannot be applied. The RADA score is high, so deleterious, and that it also accounts for SIFT, polyphen, and align GVGD. So in fact, it makes the scoring for this variant quite straightforward, as only PP3 supporting can be applied, as multiple lines of computational evidence support a deleterious effect on the gene or gene product. And therefore, we classify this variant as a class 3 VUS. The second variant I wanted to discuss is more complex. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry, most of you indeed, but in the vast majority also classified this variant as a VUS. The second variant I wanted to discuss is a more complex variant, and it is a del-ins variant, and actually it composes 2 different missense variants next to each other. And it is a well-known variant for at least my fellow Dutchmen. It is a founder mutation in ataxia telangiectasia, or AT, in our population. And the variant is present in the phosphoinositol 3 kinase-like domain. ClinVar has a record for this variant, and it is likely pathogenic, at least in the context of AT. And in the LOED, this variant is reported as VUS or likely pathogenic. It is absent from NOMAD, and HEMD Pro, the literature database, has also reports for this variant. With ATM, you have the difficulty that you can have a look at it from the point of view from the recessive disorder, AT, or the dominant cancer-related, mainly breast cancer-related disorder. And if you start off from the point of view from AT, you can notice PM2 evidence, moderate level, as no alleles are recorded in NOMAD, and also PM3 moderate, as it is found in compound heterozygosity in various patients with AT, especially in two older publications from the Netherlands. There's also PS4 moderate evidence because the variant was identified in multiple affected individuals, especially together with the PP4, as these patients had an AT phenotype, and that also the chromosome breakage was the chromosome breakage level. This variant is associated with an AT phenotype. So that is quite straightforward to class 4. And whereas some people also used PS3, I'll come back to that later as well, which makes sense that it has also been put in literature, but especially in the older literature. And most of the time in those articles, they only state that a kinase, that the variant is kinase deficient, and not really worked out in the way how they did the assay, and also that the variant does not really rely on the current standards that we now in these days put on a functional assay, and therefore we did not apply PS3. If you look on this variant purely from a breast cancer point of view or cancer point of view, you end up with PM2 moderate, of course, as there are no alleles recorded in the NOMAD database, and perhaps PP5 supporting, as the variant is identified in many commercial labs, and also in the context of breast cancer, but PP5, of course, is not recommended to use from the, at least not from clinician point of view. If you apply that stringent, you would only come up at the VOS. That's why we also allowed the VOS classification as being correct. However, the discussions also in the VCAP, so the expert panel on hereditary breast, ovarian, and prostate cancer from Clingen, they will propose that PM3 at the variable level can be used as a criterion for breast cancer associated variants when they are previously identified in a patient with a classical AT phenotype, and it is when it is proven in trans with a known pathogenic variant. And PP4, of course, can only be used for autosomal recessive disorders, but PM3 variable will be allowed in the future. So that's why I think the final classification of a likely pathogenic will be the correct classification in the end. Well, PM1 we did not apply as the mutation is not in a hotspot. The fact that it is in a domain is not giving enough evidence for pathogenicity. And PP3, that's also very difficult because it's a del-int. The first change is not predicted to do, the first amino acid that is changed does not predict to be doing deleterious. The second one is predicted to be deleterious. So we did not apply PP3. So altogether, the class 4 likely pathogenic is the most likely outcome for this variant. And most labs did find it as well, although some labs also came up to a classification of class 5 pathogenic. And I would like to end here and give the floor to Andrew for the second set of variants.
Thank you. I'm going to go over the two PALB2 variants from this scheme. Once I could advance the slide. Oh, here we go. So the first PALB2 variant is a C.3428 T to A. It's a leucine to a histidine. It is a missense variant found in the WD40 domain. So this variant has conflicting evidence in ClinVar, as well as LOVD. There are 15 alleles in the NOMAD non-cancer female database. And so overall, it has a Rebel score of 0.221, so supporting giving the evidence for BP4, as well as there's one publication involving functional studies with HRR efficiency and PARP resistance, which also supports BS3 for moderate. There is no evidence favoring pathogenicity, so we come up to a classification of likely benign. We noticed a lot of individuals who marked this variant marked it as a variant of uncertain significance. And many people did not use or did not perhaps find the functional evidence that was in that publication. So this probably explains the discrepancy between our classification of likely benign and the variant of uncertain significance, as it was a good functional study publication, but there is only one publication out there. So if you miss this, you would miss the supporting evidence for it being benign. The second variant is PALB2 C.3549 C to A, which causes a premature termination. Also located in the WD40 domain. So ClinVar has a 2-star rating with all classifications being pathogenic. There's one allele in the NOMAD database, and it's predicted to be deleterious. So the evidence for this variant is we have a PVS1 strong. If we use the decision tree from recommended by ClinGen for the PVS classification, what we have is it's not predicted to undergo nonsense mediated decay, but it does disrupt a known critical domain. So we arrive at PVS1 strong. PS1 strong as well, as there is also publication of an alternative nucleotide variant causing the same termination, which is also shown to be functionally deleterious. We have PM3 moderate, as it's been reported in trans with a pathogenic variant in Fanconi anemia class N in 2 individuals, as well as PM2 supporting. Using the CAN-VIG guidelines, 1 allele in the NOMAD database would qualify for a PM2 supporting. And so what we have, and what the majority of people who classified this variant came up with, was a class 5 or a pathogenic variant. And so now I'm going to hand over the last 2 variants to the next speaker, Kathleen.
Thank you, Arjen. Thank you, Andrew and Arjen. So I would like to discuss 2 additional variants. The first one is in RAD51C, and it concerns an intronic variant, but outside the classical +1 and 2 position. It's still in the Cartagena consensus site, but it has position +5, a change from a G to a T. It has a prior risk of pathogenicity, which is estimated to be high. Also in ClinVar, the variant has been mentioned and has received 2 stars because all submitters classified it as likely pathogenic or pathogenic. Also in LOVD, there was consensus 4 times classified as a pathogenic variant. It has been found in GNOMAT. There are 4 alleles present, and the variant was only identified in males who did not have cancer. And in HMD, it's also published as a deleterious mutation with referral to the Mindel publication from 2010. What is the evidence that is favoring the pathogenicity of this variant? The first is PS3 very strong, because there are 2 orthogonal assays demonstrating abnormal transcripts, and there is no evidence of leakiness in the splicing defect, and it results in an out-of-frame variant. So it is in agreement with the recommendations that have been made in the Burnick paper. So I will show you here the results from the splicing assays that have been done in the Mindel publication from 2010. They checked in the tumor at the cDNA level the effect of the variant, and they found really absence of the wild type allele. They also set up a mini gene assay containing 3 exons, and they have transfected this in a HeLa cell line. And they also nicely saw with RT-PCR only the shortened transcript, and Sanger sequencing confirmed these findings. And the Casaday paper from 2019 did an NGS-based approach. So they extracted RNA from lymphocyte cultures, they treated it with puromycin, and after that they made cDNA of that, and they have hybridized it to probes for 42 genes, if I remember well, among which RAD51C. And what they saw is that it clearly results in a skip of exon 6 in the case, and that this represents a fraction of 32%. They also saw a skip of exons 6 and 7 and a skip of 6, 7, and 8. And all these transcripts are out of frame, and the full-length transcript is only half of what you would expect, so only 50%. So this means there is no suggestion of leakiness. Then we also applied PP4 at the supporting level, because in the Mindel publication from 2010, there were several cases shown where there was loss of heterozygosity at the RAD51C locus in the tumor. We think that PP1 cannot be applied based on the requirements published by Jarvik and Browning related to informative meiosis. So if I can show you the pedigrees that have been published from the families with this variant, there was a publication in 2020 Journal of Medical Genetics, and there is only one person who was shown to be a carrier and affected with breast cancer, while her son was also inherited the variant, but of course, as a male, he did not express the phenotype. So this is not informative. And the other pedigree that has been published in the Mindel paper, there are, besides the index patient, there were 2 other relatives that were affected, and but it's only 2 meiosis, and to obtain statistically significant results, associations, you should have at least 3 meiosis. Okay, so we also think that we cannot use PS4 at a moderate level, because there are 4 cases in GNOMAT, and PP5, so using a reputable source, is not recommended by the ClinGen SVI. So altogether, we predict that it's a class 4 lyclopathogenic variant, and this is also what the majority of you came up with. Some have applied some of the other criteria and ended up then with a pathogenic class 5 variant classification, which of course has the same implications clinically. Then for the variant 6, it's a missense variant in RAD51D, whereby at the amino acid position 66, a valine was replaced by a methionine, and it's in the amino terminal domain. It has been submitted to ClinVar, where it got 1 star because there was some variation. Many classify it as likely benign, but it's also classified as a VUS by US-based commercial labs. There are 33 alleles in the non-cancer group in GNOMAT, and in AGMD, it's classified as disease causing based on one publication. How did we classify it? So we have several evidence that favoring that it's a benign variant. So we think it's we think that we can apply BS1 strong. We also had some discussions about it because where to put the cutoff. But very recently there were 2 interesting papers published on case control studies in the New England Journal of Medicine, and there they found that pathogenic RAD51D alleles in control populations are present at 0.05% in one study and 0.04% in the other study. While if we look at the GNOMAT frequency for this variant alone in the non-cancer females, it's higher, it's 0.054%. So if you calculate in GNOMAT, alleles are mentioned. So in individuals, you have to adapt that. I know that in Run 6, the CardioDB frequency app has been applied to do calculations for BRCA1 or 2 variants, but we feel that this is not so useful for RAD51D variants because because of the rarity of the variants on one hand, but also the penetrance data are not clear, and also about the exact phenotype. Do we also take into account the breast cancer? Furthermore, there are multiple lines of computational evidence that suggest no impact on the gene product. So that's why we applied BP4. Revel had a value of 0.088. And we did not find any arguments pro pathogenicity. So that's why we came up with likely benign. So, and this is also what the majority of you found, came up with. So many of you classified it as likely benign. Then I would like to hand over the word back to Sandy, I think.
That's great. Thank you very much, Kathleen and both Arjun and Andrew. Fantastic. Huge amount of data there to start the discussion. Simon, shall we kick off the Q&A now? And I guess there's quite a few questions coming in now. So just to reiterate, please don't pop your questions in the chat. They're going to get lost. If you pop them in the Q&A box, then we'll be able to capture them all. And as Simon says, if we don't have time to answer them all in depth just now, during the webinar, we'll actually follow up with the EQA summary report and everything will be collated there. So Simon, if it's all right with you, I'm going to kick off with a very general question, not anything specific with each variant. And that is, the use or not of PP5 is confusing to me. So can I ask Kathleen and Arjun, when can it be applied? So PP5, what's your advice?
Well, if you follow the common ACMG criteria from 2015, it was there. But later on, it has been removed, or at least it has not been recommended to use, and therefore you should avoid it. I know in the UK CANVIC rules, it is put back in actually that you can use it under certain circumstances. And that is, for example, that in papers for BSc 1 and 2, Enigma papers have been used in the past as final classifications. And that has also been used now via PP5, that you can at least put it back into your criteria. But yeah, preferably not, but in cases of emergency, you can apply it. I think that's the best answer.
Yeah, I maybe want to add, because you often do not see what evidence has been used. And the reason why Clinton advises against using it is that you may adapt the same information in your classification, so that sometimes you may count things double without knowing it, because you don't know what criteria the initial lab has applied.
Yeah, so it's better to use the original criteria that lab used and try to obtain it than just simply copying their classification.
Yeah, indeed.
Great, thank you both. So before we move on to the questions specifically to each variant, the slide in front of you here just summarizes the classification submitted by the participants for all 6 variants. So the key here is the larger the bubble for the variant means the increased number of participants who performed that and provided that classification. So anything in green is the expected classification, as just described by our expert panel, and anything coloured in blue are alternative classifications. So I think here we can see for variant 1, we've got incredibly good consensus that the majority of participants agree with the expert panel and class this variant as a 3 of uncertain significance, although there's a very small handful that's also classifying it as a 5, a 4 and a 2, as we've just discussed. I think where we worry, as we talked about slightly earlier, is where you have a change across the clinical management due to the classification. But I think here, compared to previous EQA runs, you can see that the bubbles are getting much tighter and much larger in size, so we can see more of an agreement across the board. And I think this is again evidence that participation really does start to improve classification, or at least help to standardize it. So Simon, I'm going to hand over to you and we can just do a dive into some of the variants.
Yeah, actually, Sandy, I was going to there's one more general question, which I think we could just pick up on the context.
Great.
So there's just one just come in. So again, it's to Ian and Kathleen. So how do you consider a case control study suitable to apply it? How do you consider a case control study suitable to apply it to a variant assessment? Maybe we'll pick that up in the actually reading it now. We'll pick it up in the scheme report, I think, because that's more about the general education side of things. Let's in which case we'll switch to case 1. So a question for Ian. So why not use PM1 Fatkin domain and PM2? As only mentioned 18 times in Nomad.
Yes, to start with the last one, PM2. Especially for cancer-related genes, those variants are present at quite substantial amounts in the population. The fact that it's present 13 times is much higher than the threshold that has been put also in the British rules, Canvic rules, but also what is coming up in the VCAP rules for this variant. So no, for most cancer genes, you can apply 0 or 1 as a threshold of variance that can be present in the population to apply, not higher than that. For PM1, there are also for ATM too many benign variants present in those domains. It is not discriminatively enough for the fact that a variant is present in the FAT domain or the domains it overlaps with. So generally for ATM, it's not recommended to use PM1 for these domains.
Thank you, Ian. So just triaging some of the questions. So I'm very grateful to most of you for putting down the variant you're talking about. It really does help Sandy and myself to triage the questions coming in. Can I just please remind you that if you haven't put down the variant you're really asking a question about or stating it's general, please could you resubmit your question so that we really can quickly just pull out which variant you're talking about. So I think looking at the questions so far, there are no more questions for case 1. We could probably move on to case 2 again, Ian, as we're on a roll here with a bit of ATM. For variant 2, I'm pretty certain that this variant has 1 individual in Nomad. I'd also like to ask if there are widely different prevalences in AT patients compared to controls, and should that not strengthen PS4?
Oh, that is a difficult one. I have to put my that's hard. I even had a look at the recent papers from Bridges, the Dorning paper, and even there the numbers between controls and patients were not that different. So I don't think you will get up at a sufficient level of evidence to make them basis of frequency a PS4 for this variant. So I wouldn't apply that for this variant, and most of the data around is for AT and not for breast cancer. So if you apply this for cancer, again, I think PS4 for breast cancer alone shouldn't do, but of course for AT, yes, it's possible.
Okay, so we just it's obviously these questions are quite challenging for our panelists. I mean, we've got no forward planning associated with them, and as Arjen just said, they you know, if necessary, we can provide some additional data behind this when we come to writing the report. I've got one more question, I think, Ian, for variant 2, which is why PS3 should not be assigned.
Yes.
Is this because the functional studies were for other diseases other than breast cancer?
Well, it's a very good question. To be honest, it was my first idea also to pick up PS3 for this variant, but the papers in which this was described were quite old, and at least in our current time frame, and do not match the Burnage criteria for a reliable reliable functional test. And in most papers, they just state there is no kinase activity for this variant, period, without proper describing how they performed the assay and under which conditions and what the outcome was. Although I can imagine that you have applied it, and it's I think it's a discussion point, absolutely, but we decided not to use it on the basis that for current standards, the assays did not suffice.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Sandy, shall I hand over to you?
Yes, thank you, Simon. So I'm going to jump. Andrew's unfortunately had to leave the webinar, but we'll cover all the PALB2 and other questions for his variants in the EQA summary report. So Kathleen, I'm going to come to you. Variant 5, so this is the RAD51C gene variant. So you very clearly were describing why PP1 should not be applied. So could you maybe just go through that again, and for how many family segregation should it be applied? Could we just do a quick recap on that one, please?
Yeah, well, it has been nicely described in this paper I'm referring to. Yeah. So I'll just pop it up because open it up. There should be, if you have only a single family, there should be at least 3 meioses to obtain it at the moderate level, if I remember well. And if you hold on, because and if you have at least two families, you can have a bit less meiosis to obtain it at a significant level. But yeah, okay. So if you have a strong evidence and a single family, you need 1 in 32. So this means 5 meiosis if in a single family, and you need 4 meiosis for if you have more than one family, then you can use it at a strong evidence. To have it at a moderate level, you need 4 meiosis if it's a single family, and 3 meiosis if you have more than one family. And for the supporting evidence, like we used it, the lowest level, it's 3 meiosis if you have a single family, and 2 meiosis if you have more than one family. I hope this makes it clear, but there is a nice table in that publication from Jarvik and Browning, and maybe we can respond it clearly in the answers.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. And we'll make sure that that is referenced as well in the EQA summary report, so everyone can go to that table, because it's quite difficult to retain that information in your head, doesn't it?
I still can't. I always have to look it up again to be sure.
Complex, but great to have a resource that's a go-to place that explains it very clearly. Thank you. Can I stick with you, Kathleen, and ask you about case 6? So this is the RAD51D variant. So is BP1 also possible, is one of the questions.
Yeah, so BP1 says that it's for missense variants in a gene for which primarily truncating variants are known to cause disease. So in this case, it's a RAD51D variant. And if I remember well, there have been missense variants described that are pathogenic. So in that sense, I would be hesitative to use BP1.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think I can indeed
please
apply to that. Yeah, it's a very rare disease. Rare mutations in this gene are very rare. So to say at this moment that missense variants do not play a role in RAD51D pathogenicity, I think that's early to say. I do agree with Kathleen about it.
Great, thank you both very much. Simon, there's another general question coming in. Will we go to that one next?
Definitely, I think so, Sandy. So, yeah, you want to do it or do you want me to do it?
You go for it.
Okay, so the question for both Ian and Kathleen. So is there a specific definition of multiple to apply to the PS4 criteria to cancers? How do you determine the various strengths of supporting, moderate and strong for PS4 criteria?
If you have a case control data set, it's relatively easy because you can just follow the strength of your score, of your odds score, and you can quite straightforwardly translate that back to a level of evidence. I think for proben counting is difficult for cancer again. So it's I think hard to describe it here just by words. We can put it in the final version because at least unless Kathleen has got a.
Well, I've been looking at it for PALB2. There was recently from the Beverages Consortium a nice publication on splice variants in PALB2, and their conclusion was also that only a very few variants obtain statistically significant p-values that allow you to use PS4 because in many of the genes the variants are rare, so it's difficult to use PS4 to classify these rare genetic variants. That was also their conclusion, because from the 42 they have tested, they could only apply it for one variant. So.
Okay, thank you both. Just to remind us that we're Andrew's unable to join us for the panelist discussion, so we will make sure that any questions that are raised for variants 3 and 4 will pick up in the scheme report for you. Sandy, do we have any more general questions at all?
I do, yes, thank you, Simon. So this question is not related to the current variant, so not the 6 that we've just been describing, so a general one. However, do you consider BP1 for BRCA2 gene? So would you use BP1 for BRCA2?
Maybe I can say something about it, as I'm involved also in the coming ACMG guidelines from the ClinGen. you may be able to apply it for missense variants outside of the well-characterized domains. And that is an option to use BP1, so not in general, but also only for missense variants that are outside the
DNA binding, yeah.
Especially outside of the DNA binding domain. Thank you, Kathleen. So yes, that is an option.
Great, thank you. Very clear advice. Thank you both. Excellent. Arjun, can I stay with you? Because we've got another question that's popped in for your variant 2 ATM. So PM3 moderate was used, which you eloquently described. However, could this be used at a stronger strength using case counting? So it was used at moderate level, but could we make this stronger?
Well, especially for moderate penetrant genes, the case counting is, I think, quite unreliable, as you can find it so many cases in both patients and controls. So I don't think it's recommended to use it at a stronger level than we applied.
Okay, thank you. Kathleen, do you agree with that? Would you say it's not as reliable?
I agree with what Arjen says, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I think most of the other questions are linked to our variants 3 and 4, which
we can try to answer it.
You're quite happy to answer some of those, yeah?
We can try.
So one of them that's recurring that people keep asking about is about variant 4. So this is about why are we using PS1 when it's a nonsense mutation, where the general opinion is it should be only for missense variants.
That's good question. And it's in this case it's difficult. I think it's allowed because it's behind the border of nonsense mediated decay.
Right.
And we know that a termination codon is pathogenic at that very position. We were of the opinion that you can use it. Yeah, because it's behind the last nucleotide that would you expect to get nonsense mediated decay. But I think, Kathleen, that's what I come up with.
Yeah, and that's also the reasoning we have done together, I think, because we have been discussing it quite a while. Yeah.
Which is interesting that between the experts have been discussing it as well, and it's obviously a common theme that's coming up through the Q&As as well. So it's definitely a hot topic that people are concerned around. Great. Simon, anything you want to pick out? I mean, we've got so many here. It's hard to
I've got one more on case 4 while we're on that variant. It's obviously a hot topic, as you say. So why do we use PVS1 even though the variant only deletes the last 3 amino acids?
Well, I think you gave the answer in the previous question, because there is another nonsense variant at quite the same position that was functionally tested. Is that an answer to this question? That's
kind of what I was expecting you to say. We also have a question. Do we have any questions for case 3, Sandy? Yes, we do, don't we? So, so if we've got, again, are you guys okay with case 3? So they've been through everybody, the team. So the variant is located in the WD40 domain. So should PM1 be assigned for this variant?
PM1, no, I wouldn't recommend that, because in that case you would expect to have more pathogenic missense variants in that domain than non-pathogenic variants, and actually we hardly know any pathogenic missense variants in PELB2 at all. So you can't say that it is for missense variants. It's not an enrichment of pathogenic variants. There are hardly any at all.
Kathleen, do you want to add anything to that at all?
No, I would have given exactly the same answer.
I'm happy about it.
We have consensus from the experts, so that's great.
You're too.
Sandy, do you have any more questions you want to bring up?
I'm just going through. There's a lot of them that are similar, which is good, because it's obviously everyone's very focused in the same area. Right, here's one for you with the CanVig side of things. So the variant, the PALB2 variant, which is the termination codon, why is it used as PVS1 and PS1? So on CanVig, I understood this combination is not possible. Do you want me to just check?
You're asking this to mainland European individuals who are not completely into the UK CanVig rules, I must say.
Yeah.
So I think it's easier to answer that in the final document.
We can do that, and we also have other experts on the panel as well that are involved in the CanVig author group, so we can reach out to them too to get that background, so we can collate that.
Yeah.
Sandy, I've got a general question here, which might be interesting for Kathleen and I. And so, so it relates to the website cancerhotspots.org. Are you both familiar with that website?
I know it by name, but I can't say much about it. No.
The same for me, yeah. It's probably for somatic classification.
Yeah, so the question is asking, can we rely on this website to apply PM1 criteria based on the publication? And the publication based on a publication, the publication they're quoting is integrating somatic variant data and biomarkers for germline variant classifications in cancer predisposition genes. So I guess that's probably actually, in fairness, probably a question we should bring up and summarize in the scheme report, because from your discussions, clearly that's a website we're not familiar with and not massively familiar with. So we'll bring that up in the scheme report and answer that question. Do we have any other general questions, Sandy, at all?
I've got one more, which is again general around BRCA1 and BRCA2. So the cutoff in the last exon based in Enigma, do you consider that a mutation in the last position for BRCA1, which is 1854, and for BRCA2, 3308, is not clinically relevant?
The 3308, that's the polymorphic stop in BSCA2, isn't it?
I think so.
Yeah.
The polymorphic stop is 3326, 3,326 in what?
So it may depend on which reference sequence we're working towards.
Standard.
It's one of our issues that we could be talking about the same codon, but it's not necessarily the same number.
Yeah.
But in theory, do you say that the mutation in the last position is not clinically relevant for BRCA1 and BRCA2?
If it's behind the state by Enigma stated variant, yes. We can't say for sure it's pathogenic, or we can assume it's not if it's a stop mutation. I know there are discussions about frame shifts, because frame shifts after the position can alter the length of your protein, and there is not evidence whether that can cause any problems, although it's not very likely to be. I don't think you can state that those are not pathogenic. The truncating variants behind the position are not expected to be pathogenic.
Yeah, but Arjen, not clinically relevant. I think we rather would say it's unclassified, or it's rather we start from being at class 3. So not stating that it's not clinically relevant, I think that might be too strong. Yeah.
Sure.
Which I think is a really good note, Simon, to end on, as in the nomenclature and how you describe things are really important.
Yeah.
It can be misinterpreted. So I think we'll touch upon that in the EQA summary report as well. I think that would be really useful to have that discussion.
Yeah, we also pick that up, Sandy, in our actual gene specific, well, not but cancer specific EQA schemes as well. The nomenclature is we know from experience that that's a key area of debate at times from laboratories in terms of how they interpret a variant. So yes, I agree entirely with you.
Yeah, and also important to use the correct reference sequence.
Absolutely.
Yeah, as we've just evidenced.
Yes.
Fantastic. Can I just go to the next slide then? So we really have plans to continue to deliver such EQA assessments. We're looking at 2022 and hope to plan another couple of EQA runs using the same system. As I mentioned, we'll probably mix up the BRCA1, BRCA2 and other HRR genes, because obviously there's a real need out there for activity and assessment in this field. So we will let you know through both GenQA and EMQN when registration is open and how you'll be able to participate going forward next year. Simon, over to you then.
Thank you, Sandy. So yeah, it just goes, just to build onto that, if you can spread the word about what we're trying to do to improve the participation, it'd be great to get more participants involved in it. I think you can see the value of it now. We're starting to see some improvements in performance, which is fantastic. So please do spread the word to your colleagues, encourage them to participate, etc. So yeah, it just leaves me to really thank all of our fantastic panelists. They've been fantastic as always. They provided some real insight into classification of these variants. We will make sure, as Sandy said, that we update the scheme report in detail with all your questions. So apologies if we haven't got round to answer your questions, but we will make sure we include them. So a big thank you to you guys for dialing in. It's always great to have you involved in it, and we hope this has been helpful for you. A big thank you to the media team and to AstraZeneca as well, obviously. But most importantly, thank you to my co-chair and the panelists as well for all their hard work. And we'll look forward to catching up with you in 2022.
Thank you. Bye.